Hello and welcome to the Micronations Show. I'm Adam, also known as ABanimationLtd. As always, we're going to be looking at the weird and wonderful world of micronations. That's right, the Micronations Show is back after a long break due to our exams in the United Kingdom. There's a lot of news to catch up on, but once that's out of the way, we'll be diving into the main theme of today's episode, Micronational Militaries. We shall start here at home in our host micronation, the Empire of Adamia. The Empire celebrated its first birthday on Foundation Day in April, with a very successful buffet attended by the largest gathering of Adamic citizens on record. However, attempts by ASA, the Adamic Space Agency, to launch a model rocket to mark the occasion, along with another mission in June, were unsuccessful. Next up, a big change for the whole Micronational community, when Micronation.org, home to MicroWiki, was bought from its previous owner Peter Brailsford by Emperor Jonathan I of the Empire of Austenasia. That's not the only international news though. The Grand Unified Micronational has had two new chairs since the last episode. In March, Bradley Abdullahan, Prime Minister of Wyvern, was selected to replace Cyprian I of Jutlandia. Then, just a few weeks ago in June, Joseph Kennedy of the Ashikov Federation took office. Finally, a rare international economic alliance, known as the St. Josephsburg Economic Pact, was recently created. Runasia, Austenasia, Sandus and Ashikovo are its founding members, and it aims to achieve a world first by setting up serious international trade between micronations. It remains to be seen what products will actually be traded, but as we understand it, there are already ambitious plans being set in motion, so we shall have to keep an eye on this, and maybe we'll end up going back to it in a later episode. So as we said earlier, the theme of this episode is micronational militaries. Some sort of army is a common feature in most micronations. We talked last episode about Sealand and their escapade with the Germans, but that conflict didn't necessarily involve an organised army. In more modern micronations, it is rare that the territory is as lawless as Fort Ruff's, so the kind of action that took place in Sealand would be treated as criminal activity by the Macronational police, and by Macronational I mean the recognised sovereign states that are usually members of the United Nations, such as the UK, France and Germany. Anyways, the constraints of macronational law mean that micronational armies can't carry out genuine military operations without getting arrested. To work around this, some micronations have made fictional armies, but this behaviour is generally frowned upon. The most common option is a small military, sometimes with basic non-lethal weapons, which exists for only ceremonial reasons. To take a look at what I mean, during one of my visits to Titania province in the Empire of Adamia, I got together some of the Adammic Army members, my brother Prince Jake and my cousin Matthew.
Alright, here we are in Titania today. White Gold Palace behind me, as you can see. That is Prince Jake. And the flag is, this is backwards, somewhere over there. The flag is actually hanging out the window. So, we're here today with some members of the Adammic military. We're going to be showing off some of the weapons we use. Just over here is Titania Army Base, or at least what we call Titania Army Base. Of course, there's not really much here right now, but yeah, we're going to be having a look at some of the weapons. So we'll first have a look at our little spear javelin type device. Okay, now I'm in the garage to White Gold Palace, and we sort of use this room as a little armory of sorts. See, back in the day, obviously, the younger generation of the House of Hall used many such toy weapons and so on. So they're all still kept there, and we actually now use these for the army, including this sword right here. So we'll head back outside to the army base and get some business done here. Okay, so here we are, Prince Jake here, using the spear device, and also Major Foster, who will shortly be demonstrating the Nerf gun weapon, as you can see. Now, the sword is generally used by high-ranking officers, such as myself as Grand Marshal of the Army, either in combat or for directing troop movements and, sending orders and such. So, this rarely works, it rarely reaches its target, and in fact I don't think it ever even has reached its target, you never know. Well, yes, okay, so, as such, ready, aim, fire. Wait, did it? Well, close enough. Just hit the enemy's feet, that will stop them, obviously. Here's... Yeah, well, here's Billy, mascot of the Adammic Army. Always a nice chap to have around, aren't you, Billy? Yeah? Right, so, let's head down to the trenches, shall we? So, here we are, in the trenches with Major Foster. Shout out to Matty Pops on YouTube, obviously. Okay, so can you show us this Nerf gun? How does it work?
You pull this bit back.
Yeah.
So you have the ammo on it. The rest is trigger.
Right, so, do you want to try and hit a target? What's the target going to be? Well, you could aim up a little bit. If you aim up, it'll have a bit... No, not that high up. That might get too high. No, it doesn't quite work. Okay, the target might have to be Jake. What do you think? You've got more ammo, aren't you, there? Alright. But remember, there's only fire on my command as always. Yes. Alright. Ready? Aim. Fire. Okay. You want to have another shot? Alright, fire! So, yes, that sort of gear that some of the younger ones in the army tend to use, obviously. Before we get to the stage that many of us teenagers in the Adammic Armed Forces are at, where we kind of upgrade to things like airsoft guns and things like that. I don't have any personally, but I know some of the army members do. We'll maybe have a look at that in the future. So yeah, that's ABanimationLtd in Titania Army Base with some of the weapons used by the Adammic military.
With me in real life.
Yeah, and you. And you.
In real life.
With all this talk about militaries, it is only fitting that our featured micronation this week has a long military heritage of sorts. This episode we're looking at the Empire of Austenasia, meaning that for the first time ever in the history of the ABanimationLtd YouTube channel, we have an interview. Today I'm joined by Emperor Jonathan I, 4th monarch of Austenasia.
Good evening, hello.
Good day to you. Now, so firstly Jonathan, could you give us a general overview of the Empire and its history?
Yes, okay. The Empire of Austenasia was founded in September 2008. At first it consisted entirely of myself, my family, parents and sister, and our house as the land. But over the years it has expanded significantly. We now control, the Empire is now comprised of 17 separate pieces of land, 11 in Great Britain and others scattered across the globe, some in North America, some in South America, one in Australia. And we've also grown by significantly in population. Our population is now 41. We are a monarchy. We've always been a monarchy, but the position of a monarch within the empire within the system of the empire's governance has changed quite a lot over time. It was originally a constitutional figurehead sort of position, but over the years that has evolved into a much more proactive leadership role. I'm, as you mentioned, the 4th emperor. My predecessor abdicated in January last year, and I've been empress ever since.
Yes, very interesting, very successful as far as most micronations in this sector go. So, Austenasia is well known for its military, so how do these armed forces work and how are they structured?
Well, the armed forces is comprised of the army and the air force. In total, that's 47 people, 43 in the army and 6 in the air force. I know that doesn't add up, but 2 of them are in both. So
yes.
In the army we have 3 legions. We have 2 in Britain, the Legio Primus Britannica with 17 soldiers, and the Legio Augusta, which has 12, and we have the Legio Primus Virginia in North America, stationed around the states of Virginia. In the air force, it doesn't have any. There's only 6 people. It doesn't have an actual structure.
Yes.
The army is our sort of our main defense force, and the Imperial Air Force is more of our elite troops, our shock troops, as it were, because it is composed entirely of cadet troop, Air Force cadets from the United Kingdom's Combined Cadet Force. So they actually have training, whereas the Austenasian Army is a lot more. I wouldn't say.
Amateur.
I wouldn't say it's weaker, but it's more regular. It's
Yes.
more. Yes.
Right, so the Austenasian Armed Forces have strayed from the usual NATO-themed system of ranks and instead adopted a Roman-themed structure. So what was the reason for this?
Well, we did originally have the traditional sort of NATO system. We had divisions, battalions, regiments, what have you. Yes, in January 2011 that was changed. So divisions became legions, battalions became centuries, majors became tribunes, and generals became legates. The reason for that was the increased influence of Roman culture within the empire. In the Austenasian Civil War, the emperor at the time, Esmond III, became regarded very much as a successor to the Roman emperors by the army he was recruiting, because as they were from outside the empire, being British, he recruited British volunteers from high school, and being outside the empire, they saw the position of emperor as not so much as the ceremonial figurehead that it had been under Esmond's predecessor, but when you said the word emperor to them, they thought of the Romans. And so Austenasia became a lot more influenced by Roman ideas, Roman culture, Roman names and titles, which fit in very well with our status as an imperial monarchy. And the renaming of all the units and officers in the army from British to Roman names was a result of that, really.
Yes.
There also was a practical reason for that as well, because at the time there was somewhat power struggle at the time of the renaming. So in January 2011, there was somewhat of a power struggle between Esmond III and, by then, joint emperor, my predecessor. And as he was the one who passed the law renaming it, it was seen to really cement in the minds of the army that Esmond wasn't their one master. It was because they were very much loyal to him. But after that, and also in concurrence with some administrative reforms which were highly approved of, the loyalty of the army was less to Esmond and more to the Austenasian government as a state rather than him as a person.
Yes. Yes, very fascinating indeed. So, unusually for a micronational military, there are many distinct units in the Austenasian Armed Forces, some with their own unique histories. Why is this?
Well, I suppose the best answer to give to that would be that the army especially has evolved rather organically. We haven't really had recruitment drives as such since the Civil War. Soldiers have come along and asked to join, and we've made a unit out of them. So, for example, in Cohorts Primus Esmonda, we have 3 centuries, Rivier, Zephyrier, Menovier. The first 2 are they're based around Rive and Zephyria, 2 towns in Greater Rive, the main area in Austenasia, in inner Austenasia, rather. And so, as the towns were made, we had soldiers, and they became those towns' defence forces. Centuria Free Menovier, however, we have a protectorate, a protected state in Derbyshire called Menovia, and as part of an effort to strengthen relations with that protectorate and also to coordinate its defence, the Menovian armed forces joined the Austenasian armed forces, and so they just became a century. And even though it's just Centuria 1 Rivier, Centuria 2 Zephyria, Centuria 3 Menovia, they look very regular right next to each other, but they are very distinct in that sense, because Centuria 3 Menovia is stationed actually rather far away from Austenasia by our protected state. As another example, we have Centuria 2 Midgete, which is in fact probably one of the oldest military units in micronationalism, which is still active, as it was effectively founded in 2002. So, and that was then known as the Midget Army, as the armed forces of the so-called Midget Empire, which was a sort of you could call it a micronation, but we didn't really know that term at the time. But that survived after the demise of the rather, some may think, comically named Midget Empire. But the people comprised of it, which it was comprised of, carried on that identity, and eventually joined the Austenasian Army as a military unit. We also have Centuria 2 on Diara, which is actually a naval unit. It's in the army, And we did have a navy at one point, but it was entirely titular. It existed completely on paper, so it was abolished. But now we actually have a naval unit inside the Austenasian army. It has 3 soldiers and four ships. There are 2. I can't exactly remember. I think there are 2 rowing boats and 2 like float paddle things. But there's 4 crafts and 3 soldiers, and that's because Shineshaw, the Crown dependency which that century is stationed at, is located on the borders of Lake Ontario, and so we have a naval presence on that lake. So yes, I mean a lot of the units in the army were recruited for the Australian Civil War, but since then, as separate situations come around, units have been recruited in response to those situations, and as a result of new nations or peoples or just new houses joining the empire.
Yes, that does indeed make a lot of sense, I suppose, as well. So, how do the armed forces defend Austenasia on a practical weapon? Like, are there weapons involved?
Yes, well, we do have a officially sanctioned standard weapon, but there aren't really enough of us to go around. So, on a practical level, the army would make use of whatever came to hand with improvise. We've never really had to use physical violence before, thankfully. If we did, we would be well supplied. We have all the necessary materials to make rudimentary explosives. A few of our units actually have access to firearms. But I mean, as I said, we'd hopefully never have to use these, and any lethal weapons would obviously only ever be in self-defense. The army actually works in regards to fighting. It would take something which I should probably clarify is it would take a long time to mobilize, as it were, the army. As I said, there are 43 people in it, and a lot of them would need time to really prepare. So if we were to come under attack like this second, right now, it wouldn't do much good me sending out a message via text or Facebook or whatever to every single one person and asking them to come up and help defend us. So in a more immediate situation, well, actually, if it was right now, I don't think there's anything I could do, but say we had like couple of hours of warning, we wouldn't be relying solely on the armed forces, but we would look for volunteers locally. Austenasia is the leading state in the Karshultan nations sector. There are other nations all around, for example, Orlai, which has a large population which would be very useful in a combat situation, and indeed have been before. That's not to say the armed forces are useless, of course, but it would need time to mobilise properly.
Yes, that is certainly an issue.
Thankfully, a lot of enlisted soldiers are actually living in Austenasia, so should an area be attacked, there would, in most cases, be people there already there to defend it.
Yes. Okay, so Austenasia is one of the few micronations where some members of the military have seen combat experience in such conflicts as the Austenasian Civil War in 2010. What did this involve? Would you say the legacy of these events have shaped the military and even Austenasia as a whole today?
Well, the legacy of these events has indeed shaped Austenasia in the rather literal sense that any enlisted soldier who actually defends the Empire in combat automatically becomes a citizen. That's one of the ways somebody gains citizenship. The only other way is to live in Austenasia or to be granted it by Parliament as an exceptional honour. And so actually we have 2 citizens who've become Austenasian via defending the Empire, both in the Civil War. Yes, there were 2 battles in the Civil War. The first one, the Battle of Karshultan Park, wasn't really so much a battle. I must admit that's a rather glorified title, but it was nevertheless the first actual physical meeting between 2 enemy sides, and it was a little bit of violence. I wouldn't say it was like there was bloodshed, but it wasn't. I should probably clarify. It was a nosebleed, so it wasn't like somebody got stabbed, and we didn't. It was actually. The person who got the nosebleed claimed it was through overexertion, through running around in the sunshine for a bit. I mean, I know we didn't actually touch him, so it wasn't as if we punched him in the nose.
Yeah.
So, but we haven't, as I said before, we haven't actually ever used lethal violence, and I would hope we never have to. But the main tactic we use is what's known as intimidation tactics, which is basically run at the enemy shouting and hope they run away.
Yes. Right.
And I think that is what was used in the second battle, which was the Battle of the Drove. I wasn't there, and I only know one of the people who was there, and he says that's pretty much how it went. There was no actual physical violence. It was mainly a standoff, which was resolved by means of intimidation rather than fighting.
Yes. I suppose as well that is the most practical solution when there's macronational law enforcement.
Indeed, yes, when there are contrary claims to the land involved.
Yes.
And at that time, the Grove wasn't actually independent, it was still part of the United Kingdom.
Yes. Right, okay, well that is all we have time for, Jonathan. I would like to thank you for coming on the show, and we wish the Empire all the best.
Thank you for having me.
Alright, well that's it for this episode of the Micronations Show, so if you liked this video then a like would really be appreciated. Subscribe for more, and don't forget to leave feedback in the comments. That's all from us, thanks for watching, bye bye.